You think this is a game, son?
Today you'll discover the incredible story of Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, a tomb guard at Arlington National Cemetery, whose split-second decision during a ceremonial disruption would forever change how people view the sacred duty of honoring our fallen heroes. Get ready for a narrative filled with tension, respect, and an unforgettable moment of human dignity. Before we dive into this amazing story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're listening to this story from. The morning mist hung low over Arlington National Cemetery as Sergeant Michael Rodriguez adjusted his pristine white gloves one final time. At 28 years old, he had spent the last 4 years as a sentinel at the tomb of the unknown soldier, a position that demanded absolute perfection in every movement, every breath, every heartbeat. The weight of his M14 rifle felt familiar against his shoulder as he prepared for what should have been another routine changing of the guard ceremony. Rodriguez had grown up in San Antonio, Texas, where his grandfather, a World War II veteran, had instilled in him a deep respect for military service and sacrifice. "Mijo," his grandfather would say, running his weathered fingers over his Purple Heart medal, "some things in this world are sacred. You protect what's sacred no matter what comes your way." Those words had guided Rodriguez through his military career, through the grueling 26-week selection process for the Tomb Guard, and through countless hours of practice until every movement became as natural as breathing. The selection process had been brutal. Out of hundreds of applicants, only a handful were chosen each year. Rodriguez remembered the physical fitness tests, the memorization of Arlington National Cemetery's history, the inspection standards so rigorous that a single loose thread could disqualify a candidate. He had studied the names of over 400 notable individuals buried in the cemetery, learned the precise measurements of every step, every turn, every gesture that would become part of his sacred duty. The October morning was crisp, with autumn leaves scattered across the marble plaza like nature's own memorial wreaths. Tourists were already gathering behind the rope barriers, cameras ready, voices hushed in the presence of something greater than themselves. Rodriguez could see families with children pointing in wonder, veterans wearing their service caps with tears in their eyes, and foreign visitors who had traveled thousands of miles to witness this solemn ceremony that represented the very soul of American military honor. As he began his measured 21 steps across the black mat, Rodriguez felt the familiar rhythm take hold. Each step was precisely 24 inches, each pause exactly 21 seconds, each movement a testament to the unknown soldiers who had given everything for their country. His movements were a living prayer, a physical manifestation of respect for the unknown soldiers who lay beneath the white marble tomb. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft, rhythmic sound of his polished shoes against the stone and the distant whisper of wind through the cemetery's ancient oak trees. But today would be different. Today, Rodriguez would face a challenge that no amount of training, no manual, no instructor could have prepared him for. Today, he would encounter a moment that would test not just his discipline and military bearing, but the very core of his humanity and his understanding of what it truly means to serve. The ceremony had been proceeding flawlessly for the first 15 minutes. Rodriguez executed each movement with the precision of a Swiss timepiece, his rifle gleaming in the morning sun as he performed the intricate shoulder arms maneuvers that had taken months to perfect. The crowd watched in respectful silence, many recording the solemn ritual on their phones, understanding they were witnessing something truly sacred. Among the spectators stood the Henderson family from Phoenix, Arizona. Robert Henderson, a 45-year-old construction foreman, had brought his wife Sarah and their 3 children to Washington, D.C. for their first family vacation to the nation's capital. Their youngest, 8-year-old Emma, clutched a small American flag she had bought at the gift shop, her eyes wide with wonder at the soldiers' precise movements. Also present was Dr. Patricia Williams, a history professor from Georgetown University, who brought her graduate students to the tomb every semester. She had witnessed this ceremony hundreds of times, but it never failed to move her. Standing near the front of the crowd, she quietly explained to her students the significance of each movement, each symbol, each tradition that made this one of the most solemn and respected ceremonies in American military culture. But not everyone in the crowd shared this reverence. Near the back of the gathering, a group of college students from a nearby university had arrived as part of what they called a DC Tourist Challenge. Among them was 20-year-old Jake Morrison, a sophomore studying communications who had been live-streaming their entire trip on social media. Jake had grown up in a family that questioned military traditions, viewing them as outdated displays of nationalism. To him, the ceremony seemed overly dramatic, almost theatrical. "This is so extra," Jake whispered to his friend Tyler, holding up his phone to capture the guard's movements. "It's just walking back and forth, I could do that." Tyler Chen, his roommate, shifted uncomfortably. His own grandfather had served in Vietnam, and something about Jake's dismissive attitude didn't sit right with him. "Dude, maybe we should just watch respectfully. This is pretty serious stuff." But Jake was already caught up in the attention his live stream was receiving. Comments were flooding in from his followers, many echoing his sentiment that the ceremony was over the top and unnecessarily rigid. The validation from his online audience emboldened him further. As Rodriguez approached the tomb for his ceremonial inspection, Jake's voice grew louder. "I bet he can't even break character," he said, no longer bothering to whisper. Several tourists turned to look at him with disapproving expressions, but Jake seemed oblivious to their discomfort. Rodriguez heard the disturbance but maintained his focus. Years of training had taught him to block out distractions, to remain centered on his duty regardless of external circumstances. He had dealt with crying babies, tourists who didn't understand the protocol, even the occasional heckler. But something about this disruption felt different, more deliberate, more disrespectful. The tension in the crowd was palpable. Dr. Williams found herself clenching her fists, fighting the urge to turn around and confront the disruptive student. The Henderson family exchanged worried glances, with Robert instinctively moving to shield his children from the growing disturbance. Other veterans in the crowd began to shift restlessly, their faces hardening with each disrespectful comment. Jake, emboldened by the growing number of viewers on his stream, decided to push further. "Watch this," he announced to his phone camera. "I'm going to see if I can get a reaction out of this robot soldier." What happened next would transform an ordinary Tuesday morning into a moment that would be talked about for years to come, a moment that would challenge everyone present to reconsider what they thought they knew about duty, respect, and the true meaning of honor. Jake Morrison stepped forward, crossing the invisible line of respect that separated the observers from the sacred space. His phone held high, live stream still running. He called out in a voice that carried across the entire plaza, "Hey, soldier boy, can you do anything besides walk in a straight line?" The effect was immediate and electric. The crowd collectively gasped, a sound that seemed to echo off the marble walls of the tomb itself. Children looked up at their parents with confused expressions, while veterans in the crowd felt their blood pressure rise. Dr. Williams later described the moment as feeling like someone had desecrated a church during Sunday service. Rodriguez stopped mid-step. For the first time in 4 years of service at the tomb, his perfect rhythm was broken. The silence that followed was deafening, pregnant with anticipation and disbelief. Every person present understood they were witnessing something unprecedented, something that would either end in humiliation or in a display of military discipline unlike anything they had ever seen. Jake, misinterpreting the silence as victory, pressed on. "Come on, man, show us something interesting. Do a little dance or something." His followers online were eating it up, with comments flooding in encouraging him to push further. The validation was intoxicating, and Jake felt like he was starring in his own viral video, but Rodriguez was not frozen in confusion or anger. Instead, something remarkable was happening inside his mind. Years of training, discipline, and deep respect for his duty were crystallizing into a moment of perfect clarity. He thought of his grandfather's words, of the unknown soldiers beneath his feet, of every veteran who had ever served their country with honor. Slowly, deliberately, Rodriguez turned to face Jake Morrison. His movements were as precise as ever, but now they carried a different energy, a focused intensity that made everyone present hold their breath. The morning sun caught the gleam of his rifle as he executed a perfect about-face, his eyes now locked directly on the young man who had dared to disrupt this sacred ceremony. "Sir," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying across the plaza with the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak for the dead, "I am going to ask you to step back behind the barriers and show proper respect for this ceremony." Jake laughed nervously, suddenly aware that hundreds of eyes were now focused on him rather than the guard. "Or what? You're going to arrest me? This is a free country, soldier boy." What Rodriguez did next would be replayed millions of times on social media, analyzed by military experts, and remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. Instead of calling for security, Instead of breaking protocol to engage in an argument, he did something that demonstrated the true power of discipline and respect. Rodriguez executed a perfect present arms movement, bringing his rifle to a position of honor. Then, in a voice that carried the weight of every fallen soldier, every grieving family, every sacrifice made in service to the nation, he began to speak. This tomb represents every American soldier who died in service to their country, but whose remains could not be identified, he said, his words measured and powerful. The soldier buried here could be your grandfather, your uncle, your brother. He could be someone who died saving his fellow soldiers, someone who gave his life so that you could stand here today and exercise the very freedom you're using to disrespect his memory. The crowd was transfixed. Jake's phone continued to stream, but now the comments were changing. Viewers who had initially encouraged his disruption were beginning to understand the gravity of what they were witnessing. Rodriguez continued, never breaking eye contact with Jake. Every step I take, every movement I make, is a promise to these unknown soldiers that they will never be forgotten. That their sacrifice will be honored every single day, regardless of weather, regardless of holidays, regardless of people who don't understand what they died for. The young man's bravado was crumbling. The weight of hundreds of disapproving stares, combined with the soldier's unwavering dignity, was beginning to penetrate his defensive shell. For the first time since arriving at the cemetery, Jake was truly seeing where he was, truly understanding what he had interrupted. "I'm going to give you a choice, sir," Rodriguez said, his voice never wavering. "You can continue to disrespect this sacred place and the memory of every soldier who died for your freedom, or you can step back, show proper respect, and learn something about the price of the liberty you enjoy every day." The plaza fell silent except for the whisper of wind through the trees. Every person present understood they were witnessing a masterclass in dignity, discipline, and the true meaning of strength. Jake Morrison stood frozen, his phone still recording, but his earlier confidence had completely evaporated. The weight of Rodriguez's words, combined with the palpable disapproval of everyone around him, created a moment of profound realization. For the first time in his 20 years, Jake was confronting the reality that his actions had consequences beyond his social media bubble. Tyler Chen, Jake's roommate, stepped forward and gently placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Jake," he whispered, "we need to go back. This isn't right, man." But Rodriguez wasn't finished. What he did next would elevate this moment from a simple confrontation to something approaching the sacred. Still maintaining his perfect military bearing, he began to share something that no manual had taught him, something that came from the deepest part of his understanding of service and sacrifice. "Sir, I want you to know about Private First Class Maria Santos," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying across the plaza like a prayer. She was 19 years old when she died in Afghanistan, trying to save 3 wounded soldiers from a burning vehicle. Her body was so badly damaged that her family had to bury an empty casket. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Even Jake's livestream viewers had stopped their commentary, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. "I want you to know about Sergeant James Thompson, who threw himself on a grenade to save his squad in Iraq. He was 22, engaged to be married. His fiancée still visits his grave every week 12 years later." Rodriguez's voice never wavered, but those who looked closely could see the emotion in his eyes, the deep well of respect and sorrow that fueled his dedication to this duty. "These unknown soldiers," he continued, gesturing toward the tomb, "they could be any of these heroes. They could be someone's son, someone's daughter, someone's best friend who never made it home. And every day, for over 90 years, soldiers like me have stood guard here to make sure they're never alone, never forgotten." Jake's phone was shaking in his hands now. The comments on his live stream had completely changed tone. Viewers were no longer encouraging his disruption. Instead, they were expressing shame, respect, and a newfound understanding of what they were witnessing. Dr. Williams, watching from the crowd, later said that she had never seen such a perfect example of how true strength manifests itself. "It wasn't about power or dominance," she would tell her students. "It was about dignity, respect, and the courage to stand for something greater than yourself." Robert Henderson, the construction foreman from Phoenix, found himself thinking about his own father, who had served in Vietnam but never talked about it. For the first time, he began to understand why some experiences were too sacred for casual conversation. Rodriguez then did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He extended his hand toward Jake Morrison. "Sir, if you're willing to show proper respect, I'd like to invite you to stay and learn about this place. But if you choose to continue disrupting this ceremony, I'll have to ask security to escort you from the premises." The gesture was so unexpected, so gracious in the face of disrespect, that several people in the crowd began to tear up. Here was a soldier who had been publicly mocked and disrespected, offering education instead of punishment, understanding instead of anger. Jake looked at the extended hand, then at the faces of the crowd around him, then at his phone screen, where thousands of viewers were now commenting about respect, service, and the power of dignity in the face of adversity. Slowly, very slowly, he reached out and shook Rodriguez's hand. "I'm sorry," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't understand. I didn't know." Rodriguez nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both acceptance of the apology and a challenge to do better. "Understanding is the first step toward respect, sir, and respect is what these soldiers have earned." What happened next would complete this remarkable transformation and leave everyone present with a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. Jake Morrison slowly lowered his phone, ending the live stream that had started as a joke and transformed into something profound. With Rodriguez's guidance, he stepped back behind the barriers, but instead of leaving, he remained, watching with new eyes as the ceremony continued. Rodriguez returned to his position and resumed his duties with the same precision as before, but something had changed in the atmosphere of the plaza. The crowd watched with deeper appreciation, understanding that they had just witnessed not only military discipline, but also compassion, education, and the true meaning of strength. As the changing of the guard ceremony concluded, something remarkable happened. Jake approached Dr. Williams, who had been observing the entire interaction with professional fascination. "Excuse me," Jake said hesitantly. "I heard you explaining things to your students earlier. Could you tell me more about this place? I want to understand what I almost ruined." Dr. Williams spent the next hour walking Jake through the history of Arlington National Cemetery, explaining the significance of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and sharing stories of the men and women buried there. Jake listened with an attention and respect that his friends had never seen from him before. Tyler Chen later posted on social media about the experience, writing, "Today I watched my friend learn the difference between freedom and responsibility. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is admit you were wrong and choose to grow." The video of the confrontation, which Jake had initially intended as entertainment, went viral for entirely different reasons. Military families shared it as an example of how soldiers maintain dignity under pressure. Educators used it to discuss respect, consequences, and personal growth. Veterans organizations praised Rodriguez's handling of the situation as a masterclass in military bearing and human compassion. Rodriguez himself never sought attention for the incident. When interviewed by military publications, he consistently redirected focus to the unknown soldiers and the importance of the ceremony itself. "I was just doing my job," he would say. "The real heroes are the ones we're honoring." 6 months later, Jake Morrison enlisted in the Army National Guard. He would later say that the moment at the tomb had changed his entire perspective on service, sacrifice, and what it means to be part of something larger than yourself. He requested to be stationed at Arlington National Cemetery, hoping one day to earn the honor of serving as a tomb guard himself. The Henderson family from Phoenix returned home with a story that would become part of their family legend. 8-year-old Emma kept her small American flag from that day, and years later, when she wrote her college application essay about moments that shaped her worldview, she would write about watching a soldier choose education over anger, respect over retaliation. Dr. Williams incorporated the incident into her curriculum, using it as a perfect example of how individual moments can crystallize larger truths about society, respect, and human dignity. Her students would study the video frame by frame, analyzing the body language, the word choices, and the profound transformation that occurred in just a few minutes. Rodriguez continued his service at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier for 2 more years, before being promoted and transferred to a new assignment. On his final day, he stood once more in the position where he had faced Jake Morrison, reflecting on how a moment of disruption had become a moment of connection, understanding, and growth. The tomb itself remained unchanged, as it had for nearly a century. the unknown soldiers continued their eternal rest, guarded by sentinels who understood that their duty was not just about precision and protocol, but about preserving the memory of sacrifice and the values that sacrifice represents. And somewhere in America, a young man who had once mocked military tradition was learning to march with the same precision and respect that had once seemed so foreign to him, carrying forward the lesson that true strength lies not in the ability to tear down, but in the wisdom to build up, to educate, and to transform moments of conflict into opportunities for understanding. The story of Sergeant Rodriguez and Jake Morrison became more than just a viral video. It became a reminder that in a world often divided by misunderstanding and disrespect, the choice to respond with dignity, education, and compassion can transform not just individual lives, but the very fabric of how we treat one another and the things we hold sacred.